Have you ever stopped to think about how much of your life is dictated by emotions, those sudden waves of joy, anger, or sadness that seem to sweep you along without warning? We make decisions, form relationships, and even interpret the world around us through the lens of how we feel in any given moment. But what if I told you there's an ancient philosophy that treats emotions not as uncontrollable forces, but as something far more manageable? That's where Stoicism comes in. This isn't about suppressing what you feel. It's about understanding the hidden physics behind your emotions, the rules that govern their rise and fall. Marcus Aurelius, one of history's most famous Stoics, put it perfectly. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Stoicism teaches us that emotions aren't just random reactions, they follow patterns, almost like laws of motion. Think of it this way: when someone cuts you off in traffic, your anger isn't just an explosion out of nowhere. It's the result of a chain reaction, an event, your interpretation of it, and the meaning you assign. Stoics argue that by studying these chains, we can interrupt them. Imagine being able to pause before frustration takes over, or to recognize that anxiety is often just a story you're telling yourself. This video is about uncovering those Stoic principles, the ones that turn emotional chaos into something you can navigate with clarity and purpose. And here's the best part: these ideas aren't locked away in dusty old texts. They're tools for right now, for the stress of a hectic workday or the sting of disappointment. Stoicism doesn't ask you to become unfeeling, it invites you to become discerning. Over the next few minutes, we'll explore how to separate what's truly within your control from what isn't, how to reframe setbacks as opportunities, and why the most resilient people in history often shared this same mindset. This isn't just philosophy, it's a way of living with more intention, less regret, and a deeper understanding of the emotional currents that shape your life. Ready to dive in? Let's begin. Stoicism reveals something profound about emotions. They behave almost like weather patterns, predictable in their patterns yet beyond our direct control. Think of a storm rolling in. You didn't create it, but you can prepare for it. That's the essence of what the Stoics called emotional physics. Epictetus, a former slave turned philosopher, framed it with striking clarity. Some things are within our power while others are not. Your thoughts, your judgments, your reactions, those are yours to command. The traffic jam, the rude comment, the unexpected setback, those belong to the world outside your control. Here's where it gets fascinating. Stoics don't treat emotions as enemies. They see them as signals, like the needle on a compass pointing to something deeper. When you feel anger, it's not because someone offended you, it's because you've decided their actions matter enough to disturb your peace. Seneca, writing to his friend Lucilius, put it bluntly: you are troubled not by things, but by your opinions about them. Picture this: two people stuck in the same endless line at the grocery store. One fumes, convinced the universe is against them. The other sighs, then uses the time to plan dinner or observe the colors of the produce. Same situation, entirely different emotional outcomes. Why? Because the second person recognized that their frustration wasn't in the delay itself, but in the story they told themselves about it. So here's an experiment for you. Recall a moment this week when your emotions flared, maybe irritation at a coworker or disappointment when plans fell through. Now rewind the tape. What was the trigger? More importantly, what silent assumption did you make about it? Did you tell yourself it was unfair, that it shouldn't have happened? That's the hidden lever of emotional physics. Stoics argue that by spotting these judgments, the ones we often don't even realize we're making, we gain the power to recalibrate our reactions. It's not about pretending not to feel. It's about choosing how deeply you let those feelings steer you. This is why the Stoics spent so much time examining their own minds. They weren't suppressing emotions, they were studying them like scientists, learning the rules so they could navigate life with fewer shipwrecks. And the beauty of this approach, it turns every frustration, every setback into a chance to practice. The next time your pulse quickens or your shoulders tense, pause. Ask yourself, what am I telling myself about this moment? That question alone can be the difference between being swept away by the current and learning to swim. Not everything that happens to you requires your emotional energy. That's the radical simplicity at the heart of Stoicism's dichotomy of control. Picture your mind as a garden. Some things, like the weather, are beyond your influence. You don't waste energy cursing the rain, you adjust. But the seeds you plant, the care you give, those are yours to tend. This is the Stoics' first rule of emotional physics. Separate what's within your power from what isn't, then invest your energy wisely. Epictetus opens his manual for living, the Enchiridion, with this very lesson. Some things are up to us and some are not. It sounds obvious, yet how often do we rage against traffic jams, obsess over others' opinions, or despair at events we couldn't possibly change? Take that traffic example. Your car isn't moving, horns blare, your grip tightens on the wheel. Here's the Stoic shift. The jam itself is outside your control, but your response, whether you seethe, sigh, or switch to a podcast, is entirely yours. The frustration comes from a misplaced expectation, as if the universe owed you clear roads. Seneca would call this a voluntary burden. By clinging to how things should be, we add unnecessary weight to circumstances that simply are. The Stoics ask, why hand over your peace to something you can't dictate? This isn't passivity, it's precision. Imagine two athletes before a race. One fixates on the competitors, their speed, their training, while the other focuses on their own breathing, stride, and strategy. The first athlete is emotionally exhausted before the starting gun fires. The second, prepared, present, conserving energy for what matters. That's the power of the dichotomy. It's not about ignoring external challenges. It's about directing your attention where it can actually make a difference. Try this now. Grab a sheet of paper and draw two columns. Label one within my control, the other beyond my control. Start filling them. Your effort at work, control, your boss's mood, not so much your commitment to kindness. Control, whether others reciprocate, that's their choice. This exercise isn't just theoretical, it's a map for emotional resilience. Every time you feel tension rising, ask, which column does this belong to? If it's the second, practice the Stoic art of releasing the weight you were never meant to carry. The beauty of this practice is how it transforms overwhelm into clarity. When you stop demanding that life conform to your preferences and start working with what's actually yours to shape, something unexpected happens. The storms still come, but you're no longer standing unprotected in the rain. You've built an inner shelter, not by denying reality, but by understanding where your agency truly lies. That's the secret. The Stoics knew emotional freedom isn't about controlling the world. It's about mastering where you place your attention, your effort, and most importantly, your care. There's a quiet power in loving what happens to you, even the hard parts. The Stoics called it Amor Fati, the love of fate, and it's not about passive resignation. It's about emotional alchemy, turning setbacks into fuel. Centuries after Marcus Aurelius wrote in his private journals about embracing obstacles as opportunities, Friedrich Nietzsche would echo the idea, calling Amor Fati his formula for greatness. Both understood life isn't just something to endure, it's something to engage with fully, exactly as it arrives. Think of it like this. When a sculptor chips away at marble, they don't curse the imperfections in the stone, they work with them. The cracks and grooves become part of the art. That's the Stoic approach to adversity. Marcus Aurelius put it plainly: the impediment to action advances action. What stands in the way becomes the way. A missed promotion, a failed project, even an illness, these aren't just misfortunes. They're raw material. The modern world tells us to avoid discomfort at all costs, to rage against delays and demand instant fixes. But the Stoics whisper something radical. What if you stopped resisting and started listening? Here's where most people get stuck. We confuse acceptance with surrender, as if loving fate means giving up. But Amor Fati isn't about lying down, it's about leaning in. Imagine two travelers caught in the same storm. One spends the night cursing the wind, the other notices how the rain paints the world in shades they've never seen before. Both are wet, only one is richer for it. This shift isn't magical thinking, it's deliberate reframing. The Stoics didn't deny pain, they chose to see it through a different lens. So how do you practice this? Start small. Grab a notebook and recall a recent frustration, a cancelled plan, a critical comment, a day when nothing went right. Now, instead of replaying why it hurt, ask, what did this make space for? What did it teach me? Maybe the delay gave you time to rethink a decision. Maybe the criticism revealed a blind spot. This isn't about pretending hardships don't sting. It's about recognizing that even the sharpest edges can carve out deeper wisdom. The irony is this: the more we fight reality, the heavier it feels. Amor Fati lifts that weight by dissolving the illusion that life should bend to our whims. It's not about liking every moment. It's about trusting that every moment, even the ones that ache, is part of the work, the art, the unexpected beauty of being alive. The next time you face a hurdle, try whispering the old Stoic phrase, "This too is for me." Watch how the ground beneath you shifts when you stop seeing obstacles as interruptions and start seeing them as invitations. What if the very thing you fear could become your greatest source of strength? The Stoics practiced something called Premeditatio, Malorum, Latin for the premeditation of evils, and it's not as grim as it sounds. Seneca described it like training for a storm while still on dry land. Rehearse in your mind exile, torture, war, shipwreck. All the terms of our human lot should be before our eyes. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. Why dwell on potential disasters? But here's the twist. By deliberately imagining the worst, you strip it of its power to shock you. It's emotional inoculation, like a vaccine that exposes you to a small dose of fear so you can build immunity to the real thing. Take public speaking, a fear so common it outranks death for some people. The night before a big presentation, your mind races with nightmares, forgetting your lines, the audience laughing, your voice cracking. Now imagine sitting quietly and walking through those scenarios on purpose. What if you stumble? You'll pause, take a breath, and continue. What if the crowd seems bored? You'll adjust your tone or throw in a story. By confronting these fears in advance, something remarkable happens. The unknown loses its fangs. The anxiety that once felt like a tidal wave becomes a series of manageable ripples. This isn't about pessimism, it's about preparedness. Ancient Stoics weren't doomsayers, they were pragmatists. They knew life is unpredictable, but our distress often comes from the gap between expectation and reality. Premeditatio Malorum closes that gap. Picture a fire drill. No one hopes for a fire, but practicing the exit route means less panic if smoke ever fills the hallway. The modern world bombards us with messages to think positive, as if ignoring potential pitfalls will magically prevent them. Stoicism offers a wiser path. See clearly, plan accordingly, and realize you can handle more than you think. Here's how to try it today. Before your next stressful event, a difficult conversation, a job interview, even a doctor's appointment, spend 5 minutes mentally scripting the worst that could happen. Then go further, script your response. If the interviewer seems uninterested, you'll stay composed and pivot. If the test results aren't ideal, you'll research next steps. This exercise doesn't just reduce anxiety, it reveals your own resilience. The Stoics believed that what frightens us is often the story we attach to events, not the events themselves. By rewriting that story in advance, you become the author of your calm. The brilliance of this practice lies in its simplicity. You're not avoiding fear, you're befriending it. When Seneca wrote, "We suffer more often in imagination than in reality," he wasn't dismissing pain. He was pointing to a liberating truth. Much of what we dread never happens, and even when it does, we're rarely as powerless as we feared. Premeditatio Malorum turns the unknown into a map and fear into a compass. The next time anxiety whispers, "What if?" answer it. Then watch how your courage grows in the space where uncertainty once ruled. We rarely pause to examine what we truly need instead. We chase wants we didn't even know we had until the world told us to want them. The Stoic teacher Musonius Rufus put it bluntly: the more we value things outside our control, the less power we retain over our own happiness. Think about that for a moment. Every time we attach our peace to something we don't possess, a newer phone, a bigger house, someone else's approval, we hand over the keys to our emotional stability. Consumerism didn't invent this trap, but it has perfected it. Ads whisper that joy lies just one purchase away. Social media floods us with curated glimpses of lives we're convinced we're missing. And before we know it, desire becomes a constant hum in the background of our days. Epictetus saw this clearly 2,000 years ago. He is a wise man who does not grieve for the things he has not, but rejoices for those he has. Yet how often do we flip that equation? Scrolling through photos of a friend's vacation, we feel the pang of lack instead of gratitude for our own comforts. Standing in a crowded store, we fixate on the one item just out of budget rather than the cart already full. These aren't just passing thoughts, they're tiny fractures in our emotional foundation. Each unchecked desire trains us to see life through a lens of scarcity, as if happiness were always hiding just beyond our grasp. Here's the paradox: desire isn't the problem, it's the disproportionate weight we give it. The Stoics didn't advocate for austerity or self-denial. They urged discernment, asking, "Is this thing serving my peace or disrupting it?" Picture two people at a dinner party. One spends the evening eyeing the fancier dish at the next table, distracted by comparison. The other savors each bite, fully present. Both experience the same meal, but only one leaves nourished in more than body. So let's try an experiment. Pick one desire you've been carrying, not a fundamental need, but a want that's taken up space in your mind. Maybe it's the upgrade you don't require, the social status you've been chasing, or even the craving for a situation to unfold exactly as you've scripted it. Now imagine loosening your grip on it just slightly, not rejecting it outright, but holding it more lightly, like a leaf in your palm rather than a rope you're clinging to. That small shift is where Stoic discipline begins. It's not about having less, it's about needing less to feel whole. The freedom in this practice sneaks up on you. When you stop measuring your life against phantom benchmarks, you start noticing what's already there: the warmth of sunlight through a window, the absurdity of a shared laugh, the quiet satisfaction of enough. Musonius Rufus called this the wealth of self-sufficiency, not because you've acquired everything, but because you've unlearned the habit of believing you're missing anything at all. Marcus Aurelius once cut through the noise with a simple command: waste no more time arguing what a good man should be one. That's the heartbeat of Stoic action, not endless deliberation, but decisive movement. Notice he didn't say, "feel like a good man," or "philosophize about goodness." The transformative power lies in the doing. Every time you delay what you know you should do, you're not just postponing a task, you're eroding trust in yourself. Guilt isn't just about what you didn't accomplish, it's the gap between who you believe you should be and how you actually behave. But here's the secret Stoics uncovered. Action isn't just the result of confidence, it's the source of it. Take something as mundane as the gym. You know the cycle: the alarm goes off, you hit snooze, and the mental gymnastics begin. I'll go tomorrow. One day won't matter. But with each skip, the voice whispering, "You're failing," grows louder. Now flip the script. Imagine dragging yourself there despite the resistance. The workout might be mediocre, but something deeper shifts. You prove to yourself that discomfort doesn't dictate your choices. That's emotional calibration in motion, aligning your actions with your values, not your fleeting moods. Seneca observed this too. Associate with people who may improve you. Welcome what you get from them. But what if the person you most need to associate with is the version of yourself who follows through? This isn't about grand gestures. The Stoics revered small, consistent acts, the daily choices that sculpt character. Picture two people facing the same messy kitchen. One side walks away and lets the guilt of avoidance linger. The other spends 5 minutes washing dishes, not because they're motivated, but because they refuse to let inertia win. The action itself is trivial. The self-respect it builds is monumental. Procrastination isn't a time management issue, it's an emotional one. We avoid tasks because we're afraid of failure, of boredom, of confronting our own limitations. But every time we act despite that fear, we rewrite the story. So here's your challenge today. Pick one thing you've been avoiding, not your entire to-do list, not some Herculean task. Something simple, a text you've put off sending, a drawer that needs organizing, a conversation you've delayed. Do it not because it's urgent, but because each completed action is a brick in the foundation of your self-trust. The Stoics didn't wait for inspiration to strike. They understood that inspiration follows action like heat follows friction. When Cicero said, "Action removes the doubts that theory cannot solve," he wasn't dismissing thought, he was honoring its proper place. Wisdom without application is like a compass in a drawer. True north means nothing until you start walking. Notice what happens after you complete that one neglected task. The weight lifts not because the task itself was heavy, but because you stopped carrying the anticipation of it. That lightness, that's the emotional physics of action, proof that momentum isn't just for objects in motion. It's for hearts and minds too. The gym will still be there tomorrow, but the version of you who shows up today, that's who you're becoming. Your emotions don't come from events, they come from the invisible judgments you attach to them. Epictetus laid it out centuries ago. Men are disturbed not by things, but by their views. Think of your mind as a courtroom where every experience gets a verdict. Someone criticizes your work, and instantly your internal gavel slams down. This means I'm inadequate, but here's the Stoic twist: that verdict isn't fact. It's a choice, one you can question, challenge, or even overturn. This is the discipline of assent, the practice of pausing between what happens and how you decide to interpret it. Modern therapists call this cognitive reframing, but the Stoics were mapping this terrain long before psychology became a science. Picture a colleague dismissing your idea in a meeting. Your face flushes, your stomach tightens, classic fight or flight, but dig deeper. That reaction isn't about their words, it's about the story you're telling yourself. Maybe it's "they don't respect me," or "I'll never be good enough." Those aren't truths, they're hypotheses. The discipline of assent asks, what if you tested them? Could their tone have been fatigue, not malice? Might their critique contain a grain of useful feedback? This isn't about making excuses for others. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your inner narrative. Consider how differently two people might process the same criticism. One spirals into self-doubt, convinced it confirms their worst fears. The other pauses, weighs the comment's validity, and discards the rest like unhelpful static. Same words, vastly different emotional outcomes. The gap between those reactions, that's where Stoicism lives. Marcus Aurelius practiced this daily, writing reminders like, "If someone provokes you, realize that your mind is complicit in the provocation." In other words, you're not a passive recipient of emotion, you're an active participant in its creation. Here's how to put this into practice right now. Think of one belief that consistently dims your mood. Maybe, "I must be perfect to be valued," or "If I'm not in control, everything will fall apart." Now imagine that belief as a guest in your mind, not a permanent resident. Challenge it with two questions. Is this absolutely true? Is this belief serving me? You'll often find these convictions crumble under scrutiny. They're relics of old fears, not reflections of reality. The Stoics knew this. Our most painful emotions often stem from outdated software running in the background of our minds. The discipline of Assent is the act of hitting update. This practice doesn't erase life's stings, but it does something more profound. It reveals that many of the thorns we feel were grown in our own garden. When Epictetus said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters," he wasn't dismissing hardship. He was offering a key to a quieter mind. The next time emotion surges, try slipping into the observer's seat. Ask, "What story am I telling here?" And watch how much lighter the weight feels when you realize you've been carrying it by choice all along. Marcus Aurelius had a peculiar habit. He'd close his eyes and picture the world from above, as if viewing Earth from the stars. The bustling cities became tiny dots, arguments faded into silence, and his personal worries shrank to near invisibility. He called this the view from above. But the Stoics had a grander word for the principle behind it: Sympatheia, the profound interconnectedness of all things. This isn't some mystical abstraction, it's emotional physics in its purest form. When you grasp that you're a single thread in a vast tapestry, suddenly, the coworker who annoyed you or the delayed flight that ruined your plans isn't just your problem. It's part of an intricate web where everything touches everything else. Think of it like standing in a forest. If you focus only on the dirt at your feet, you might resent the fallen leaves for being messy. But step back, and you see those decomposing leaves feed the trees that give you oxygen. Sympatheia is that shift in perspective, recognizing that what feels like an inconvenience or injustice to you might be a necessary ripple in a larger system. The rude barrister, maybe they're nursing a sick parent at home. The traffic jam, hundreds of lives intersecting, each with their own urgent stories. This doesn't excuse harm, but it does dissolve the illusion that the universe revolves around your momentary discomfort. Now contrast this with how we typically experience the world today, especially through social media. Algorithms feed us content that mirrors our existing biases, creating echo chambers where we're the main character and everyone else is either a supporting actor or an obstacle. The more curated our feeds become, the harder it is to remember that other people's lives are just as complex and vivid as our own. Isolation isn't just physical, it's emotional, a shrinking of perspective until every minor slight feels like a cosmic injustice. The Stoics would argue this is the opposite of sympatheia. Instead of seeing yourself as part of a whole, you start believing you are the whole. Here's a simple way to practice this shift: stargazing. Not the quick glance upward, but the kind where you lie on your back and let the scale of the cosmos sink in. Those pinpricks of light traveled thousands of years to reach your eyes. Some of the stars you're seeing don't even exist anymore. Your deadlines, your grudges, your insecurities, they're all happening on a speck of dust orbiting one unremarkable star in a galaxy among billions. This isn't meant to make you feel small. It's meant to help you recognize that your emotions are part of something unimaginably vast. When Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Think of the whole universe whereof you are but a tiny part," he wasn't dismissing human struggles. He was offering a balm for the fever of self-importance. Try this tonight. Step outside, look up, and for just 5 minutes, let the sky remind you of Sympatheia. Then notice how the coworker who snapped at you yesterday feels less like a villain and more like another flickering light in the same grand constellation. The frustration won't vanish, but it might just lose its power to consume you. That's the magic of emotional physics. When you zoom out far enough, even the sharpest edges start to blur into the bigger picture. Seneca once cut through the noise of daily life with a razor-sharp truth. Life is long if you know how to use it. At first glance, that sounds absurd. How can a lifespan measured in decades feel anything but fleeting? But here's what he meant. When we forget that our time is finite, we waste it on distractions dressed as priorities. The Stoics practiced memento mori, remembering death not as morbid fixation, but as an emotional clarifier. Picture standing at the edge of a cliff, feeling the wind tug at your clothes. In that moment, what trivial worries still cling to you? That's the power of confronting mortality. It strips away the noise, leaving only what truly matters. Consider a near-miss accident, the screech of tires, the heart pounding in your throat. In the aftermath, didn't the world seem sharper, colors brighter, conversations richer, petty grudges suddenly weightless? That's memento mori in action. The Stoics argued we don't need actual brushes with death to access this clarity. Simply holding the awareness that our days are numbered can transform how we spend them. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself each morning, "You could leave life right now. Let that determine what you do, say, and think." Not to paralyze himself with fear, but to energize himself with purpose. Here's the paradox. By staring into the abyss, we learn to truly see the light. When a journalist asked Warren Buffett what he considered the most valuable skill for success, the billionaire didn't mention stock analysis. He said, "Imagine writing your own eulogy, then work backward to live a life that merits it." That's Stoic emotional physics at work. Try it now. If you were gone tomorrow, what would people remember? Not your polished resume or accumulated possessions, but the moments you made others feel seen, the courage you showed when it counted, the love you didn't withhold. Suddenly, the argument over who forgot to take out the trash feels absurd, doesn't it? This practice isn't about ignoring joy in favor of grim realism. It's the opposite. By acknowledging life's brevity, we stop postponing what gives it meaning. The vacation you keep delaying, the apology you've been meaning to offer, the creative project you've labeled someday. Memento mori whispers, someday is now. The ancient Romans kept skulls on their banquet tables not to kill the mood, but to enhance it. How much sweeter the wine tastes when you know the glass won't stay full forever. So here's your invitation. Tonight, light a candle and write 2 sentences. First, the eulogy you fear might be true if nothing changes. Then, the one you ache to deserve. The gap between them, that's your compass. The Stoics knew what modern psychology confirms. We're terrible at predicting what will bring lasting fulfillment. But when we let the awareness of endings guide us, our emotions align with what's timeless, not the rush of temporary highs, but the quiet resonance of a life well lived. Death isn't the enemy of meaning, it's the very thing that makes meaning possible. Musonius Rufus had a blunt warning for his students: pleasure is the greatest obstacle to freedom. Not because enjoyment is wrong, but because mistaking fleeting thrills for lasting joy is like drinking salt water to quench thirst. It leaves you emptier than before. The Stoics drew a bright line between hedon's surface-level pleasure and Eudaimonia, deep flourishing. One is a spark, the other is the steady warmth of a hearth. Think of the difference between binge-watching a show until your eyes glaze over versus the quiet satisfaction of mastering a new skill. Both might feel good in the moment, but only one leaves you with something that lasts. Marcus Aurelius painted a striking metaphor for this distinction. Nowhere can you find a more peaceful retreat than in your own soul. That internal citadel he describes isn't built on dopamine hits or external validation. It's constructed through deliberate choices, choosing depth over distraction, meaning over novelty. Modern neuroscience backs this up. Activities like scrolling social media trigger quick bursts of pleasure chemicals, while pursuits like learning an instrument or volunteering activate the brain's reward systems more slowly but far more sustainably. The Stoics weren't anti-happiness, they were architects of a sturdier kind of joy. Consider two people ending their day. One spends 3 hours numbing out with viral videos, chasing the next laugh until exhaustion forces them to bed. The other dedicates 30 minutes to journaling or practicing a language, then sleeps with a subtle sense of growth. Both sought relief from daily stress, but one path erodes time while the other redeems it. This is Musonius Rufus' critique in action. Sensory indulgence isn't inherently evil, but when it becomes our default refuge, we trade sovereignty over our minds for temporary anesthesia. Here's where Stoic joy surprises people. It often includes discomfort, the burn in your muscles during a workout, the frustration of struggling with a new concept, even the vulnerability of mending a strained relationship. These aren't contradictions, they're proof that joy isn't the absence of difficulty but the presence of purpose. Marcus Aurelius journaled about this during his military campaigns. The impediment becomes the path. That's the alchemy of Stoic contentment, transforming resistance into resilience. Your challenge: cultivate one habit this week that builds your internal citadel. Not a grand, unsustainable overhaul, something small but meaningful. Maybe it's 10 minutes of morning reflection instead of reaching for your phone, or replacing one episode of a show with a chapter of a book that stretches your thinking. Notice how it feels different from passive entertainment, less like being swept away by a wave, more like planting roots in solid ground. True joy, the Stoics remind us, isn't something you consume. It's something you create, one deliberate stone in your inner fortress at a time. Epictetus gave us a simple phrase that acts like an emergency brake for runaway emotions. First say to yourself what you would be. That tiny pause, the space between what happens and how you react, is where Stoic wisdom comes alive. Modern neuroscience confirms what ancient philosophers knew. We have about half a second between stimulus and response where choice still exists. After that, the emotional hijacking begins. Think of road rage: someone cuts you off, your pulse spikes, and before you know it, you're leaning on the horn or shouting words you'll later regret. But in that half-second window, that's your Stoic pause. Here's why this matters. Your brain processes threats before you're even consciously aware of them. The amygdala, your internal alarm system, can trigger fight or flight before your rational mind catches up. Stoicism doesn't ask you to override biology. It teaches you to insert a deliberate delay. Picture this: the same driver swerves into your lane. Instead of instantly reacting, you hear Epictetus' voice: what kind of person do you want to be right now? That question creates just enough space for your prefrontal cortex, the brain's reasoning center, to join the conversation. Maybe the driver made an honest mistake. Maybe they're rushing to the hospital. Or maybe it doesn't matter. Why? Because your peace isn't for sale to every stranger's bad decision. This is where the 5-breath technique comes in. When emotion surges, your body enters a temporary state where rational thought dims. but breathing is the one autonomic function you can consciously control. Try it now. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 2, exhale for 6. Repeat 4 more times. With each breath, you're extending that half-second window, giving your wiser self time to surface. Ancient warriors used this before battle. Modern CEOs use it before high-stakes meetings. The physics are the same. Oxygen slows your heart rate, cortisol drops, and suddenly you're no longer a passenger in your own reactions. Let's break down why this works. Anger, anxiety, even excitement, they are all forms of energy. The Stoic pause doesn't eliminate that energy, it redirects it. Like a river hitting a dam, the force doesn't vanish, it's channeled toward something useful. Seneca described anger as brief insanity, but noted it requires consent to take hold. Every time you choose the pause, you're withdrawing that consent. Practical tip: train this skill in low-stakes moments. When your coffee spills, when your Wi-Fi lags, when someone interrupts you, practice the 5 breaths. These mini trials build the neural pathways so the technique is automatic when you really need it. Epictetus wasn't just offering philosophy, he was handing you a tool. Not to control the world, but to govern your place within it, one conscious breath at a time. Marcus Aurelius left us a razor-sharp tool for emotional clarity. Strip away the story you're telling yourself. Think about that for a moment. How often do we layer meaning onto events until the original fact disappears under the weight of our interpretations? A breakup isn't just "they ended the relationship." It's "I'm unlovable," or "I'll never find someone again," or "this proves I'm broken." The raw event, one person choosing a different path, gets buried under an avalanche of self-created narratives. This is why Stoics practiced what they called objective representation, cutting through the mental noise to see the thing itself, not the drama we've wrapped around it. Let's try an experiment. Picture a recent moment that stirred strong emotions. Maybe a friend cancelled plans last minute, or your boss gave critical feedback. Now describe it purely factually, like a courtroom stenographer recording testimony. "My friend texted, can't make it 2 hours before we were to meet. My boss said the report needed more data analysis." Notice how different that feels from the stories we usually tell. "They don't value my time," or "I'm terrible at my job." The facts are neutral. The suffering comes from the meanings we assign. Seneca saw this clearly. We are more often frightened than hurt, and we suffer more from imagination than reality. Here's the detox process in action. Say you're replaying an awkward conversation where you stumbled over your words. The objective representation: "My voice shook during 3 sentences of a 15-minute discussion." That's all. The rest, "they think I'm incompetent," "I always mess up," is optional. This isn't about denying emotion. It's about recognizing how much of our pain comes from unexamined assumptions. Like cleaning a cluttered room, objective representation lets you see what's actually there versus what you've piled on top. Try this today. Take one emotional trigger and write 2 versions. First, the dramatic story you've been telling yourself. Then, the bare facts, no adjectives, no interpretations, just observable events. The gap between them is where your power lies. Epictetus put it perfectly. It's not things that upset us, but our judgments about things. When you stop confusing the weather with your umbrella, you realize you've been standing in the rain by choice. The storm might still rage, but now you know where to find shelter. Hierocles, an often overlooked Stoic thinker, gave us a powerful visual for balancing empathy with wisdom, the expanding circles of concern. Picture a series of concentric rings radiating outward from a center point. At the core, you stand. The next ring holds your immediate family, then friends, community, and finally humanity itself. Most of us live reactively, pouring energy indiscriminately, exhausting ourselves for strangers while snapping at loved ones, or drowning in others' emotions until we have nothing left to give. Stoic empathy isn't about closing those circles. It's about tending to each one with clear-eyed compassion without collapsing the boundaries between them. This reveals a crucial distinction modern psychology echoes. Empathy isn't emotional merging. When a friend shares grief, you don't help by falling into the same pit of despair. You extend a ladder. Think of a nurse in an oncology ward. If she internalized every patient's pain, she'd be overwhelmed by lunchtime. Yet if she walls herself off completely, her care becomes mechanical. The Stoic middle path: understand deeply, but don't disappear into the understanding. That's compassionate detachment, holding space for another's struggle without requisitioning it as your own. Caregiver burnout illustrates what happens when we ignore this balance. A daughter tending to her aging mother stops sleeping, skips meals, and cancels all social plans. She believes sacrificing everything proves her love, but exhaustion makes her impatient. Resentment simmers beneath the surface. Stoicism would ask, is this truly helping either of them? The mother likely wouldn't want her child's health destroyed. Sustainable compassion recognizes that you can't pour from an empty cup. Epictetus put it bluntly: if you want to improve, be content to appear clueless in extraneous matters, including playing the martyr when cooler judgment would serve better. Here's how to practice this today. Next time someone unloads their stress on you, try kind but boundaried listening. Nod without interrupting. Reflect back what you hear that sounds incredibly frustrating, rather than absorbing their emotion as your own. Notice when your shoulders tense or your pulse quickens. These are signs you've over-identified. Then, visualize hierarchical circles. You're standing beside them, not drowning with them. This isn't coldness, it's the only way to show up fully, not just in this conversation, but for all the others waiting in your wider rings of care. The paradox. This boundary setting often makes us more present, not less. Like a tree with deep roots, you can bend in the storm of others' emotions without being uprooted. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his letters, expressing deep concern for a friend's illness, while maintaining his own equanimity to make clear decisions. That's Stoic empathy at its finest, feeling deeply, but never forgetting that your first responsibility is to guard the light you'll need to keep shining for others tomorrow. Aristotle planted the seed that would bloom into Stoicism's most radical idea about emotions: Eudaimonia, often translated as flourishing or the good life. But here's where it gets counterintuitive. This isn't about chasing happiness in the way we've been taught to think of it. Modern culture sells happiness as a feeling, something to extract from experiences like squeezing juice from fruit. The Stoics, building on Aristotle's framework, saw it as something far deeper, a byproduct of living in alignment with your highest self. Imagine two gardeners. One frantically plucks petals from flowers, hoping to collect enough to build a bouquet. The other tends the soil, trusts the seasons, and lets blossoms emerge naturally. That's the difference between fleeting pleasure and eudaimonia. Consider the midlife crisis, that cultural cliché where someone trades their minivan for a sports car or abandons a stable career chasing some nebulous passion. On the surface, it looks like a pursuit of happiness, but dig deeper and you'll often find a misalignment of values. The Stoics would argue this isn't a failure of age, it's a failure of discernment. When we confuse external markers of success, the job title, the bank balance, the Instagram perfect life, with true flourishing, we set ourselves up for what Seneca called a life of quiet desperation. The sports car might deliver a thrill, but like sugar, the rush fades fast. Eudaimonia, by contrast, is the steady energy of a life where your actions and your ethics are in harmony. Here's the litmus test. Think of someone you deeply admire, not for their achievements, but for how they move through the world. Maybe it's the teacher who radiates patience even on chaotic days, or the nurse who treats exhaustion with kindness rather than resentment. Their strength doesn't come from avoiding hardship, it comes from a clarity about what matters. That's Eudaimonia in action. Marcus Aurelius, ruling an empire amid wars and plagues, wrote, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts, not the quantity of your comforts." So let's make this personal. Pause for a moment and ask, what would flourishing look like stripped of society's scripts? Not the dream life you've been sold, but the one that would make you feel whole even if no one applauded. For some, it's creating rather than consuming. For others, it's presence over productivity. The Stoics weren't prescribing a single path, they were insisting that you choose yours consciously. Like a tree growing toward light, Eudaimonia is the quiet pull toward what makes you feel most alive. Not in a burst of emotion, but in the grounded certainty that you're rooted where you belong. This is why the Stoics kept returning to nature as their metaphor. A river doesn't agonize over its route to the sea. It flows according to its essence. When we resist our own chasing someone else's version of success or numbing ourselves with distractions, we don't just feel unhappy. We feel untrue. Epictetus, who taught from a crippled body and a freed slave's perspective, put it plainly: first learn who you are and then adorn yourself accordingly. Not with wealth or status, but with choices that let your character breathe. That adornment, that's flourishing, not a destination, but a way of traveling. Your turn now. Tonight, light a candle and finish this sentence. At my best I am. Not what you do, but how you are. The words that follow might just be your compass to Eudaimonia, the kind of happiness that doesn't fade when circumstances change, because it's built into the very core of how you live. Epictetus cut through centuries of distraction with 5 words. The essence of philosophy is self-awareness. What he called Prosoch, the discipline of attention, wasn't about emptying the mind like some modern mindfulness trends suggest. It was about becoming a gatekeeper for your own mental space. Think of your attention as a spotlight in a dark room. Whatever it illuminates grows in importance, whether it's a genuine concern or just a flashing notification. The Stoics realized something profound. You don't control the first thought that enters your mind, but you absolutely decide which one gets to stay for tea. Consider your smartphone for a moment. Every ping, buzz, and badge pulls your focus like a toddler tugging at your sleeve. Now imagine those interruptions aren't just external, they're your own unchecked thoughts. Did I forget to reply to that email? What if they didn't like my presentation? Each time you entertain these mental pop-ups, you're training your brain to treat them as urgent. Seneca saw this 2,000 years ago. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. He wasn't criticizing travel. He was diagnosing the fractured attention that leaves us emotionally exhausted despite physical stillness. Here's where Prosoch becomes practical. Try this tonight. Set aside 60 minutes for an attention audit. Grab a notebook and track what captures your focus, not just screens, but the mental loops you replay. You might notice 3 patterns. First, how often you're pulled toward hypothetical worries. What if my flight gets cancelled? Second, how reflexively you reach for distraction when discomfort arises. Third, how rarely you choose where your attention goes versus having it hijacked. This isn't about judgment. It's about recognizing that your emotional state is directly tied to where you let your focus linger. The magic happens when you start treating attention like currency. Would you hand $100 to every street vendor who asks? Probably not. Yet we do this mentally all day, giving our focus to whatever shouts loudest. Epictetus offered an alternative. practice hearing only what deserves to be heard. When anxiety about tomorrow's meeting arises, ask, is this useful? If yes, schedule time to address it properly. If no, visualize placing the thought in a boat and watching it drift down river. What makes Stoic mindfulness different from generic live in the present advice is its active quality. It's not passive awareness but deliberate curation. Picture two photographers at a protest. One snaps every chaotic moment, overwhelmed by the frenzy. The other selects frames carefully, finding the quiet humanity amid the noise. Both witness the same event, but their emotional experiences differ radically. That's Prosoch, not ignoring life's storms, but choosing where to stand within them. Your challenge for the next 24 hours, pick one routine activity: brushing your teeth, walking to your car, waiting for coffee, and do it with full attention. Not as a meditation exercise, but as a reclaiming of sovereignty. Notice how often your mind tries to dart away and gently guide it back. Like training a puppy, this isn't about perfection but consistent redirection. The Stoics knew what neuroscience now confirms: where your attention goes, your emotions follow. Guard the gates wisely, and suddenly, what once felt like chaos becomes a landscape you navigate with intention. Seneca called anger brief insanity, a fire that burns the hand of the one holding it longer than it scorches its target. Imagine carrying a hot coal with the intent to throw it. Long before it leaves your grip, you're already wounded. That's the physics of resentment. Stoic forgiveness isn't about excusing wrongs or forgetting harm. It's the conscious decision to stop drinking poison and waiting for someone else to get sick. Picture two sisters locked in a decade-long feud over an inheritance. One clenches every interaction with barbed comments. The other retaliates with icy silences. The estate long settled, the lawyers moved on. The only thing still being divided day after day is their peace. Here's what most misunderstand: forgiveness isn't a favor to the offender, it's a reprieve for yourself. Neuroscientists have found that harboring grudges activates the same stress pathways as physical threat, flooding your body with cortisol as if you're perpetually under attack. Meanwhile, the person who wronged you might be sleeping soundly, utterly unaware of the real estate they occupy in your mind. Marcus Aurelius observed this with typical bluntness. The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury. Not because the other person deserves your compassion, but because you deserve your freedom. Try this experiment tonight. Take a blank sheet of paper and write a letter you'll never send. Pour out every raw emotion: the betrayal, the injustice, the things you wish you'd said. Then fold it and tuck it away. This isn't about closure from the other person. It's about reclaiming the mental space they've colonized. The Stoics knew what modern psychology confirms: putting words to wounds diminishes their power. Like lancing a boil, the poison needs somewhere to go. Consider the alternative: letting bitterness calcify. Think of resentment as a shadow you've mistaken for a companion. It walks with you everywhere, dimming sunlight, distorting perspectives, until you forget what life looked like before you started carrying it. Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching emperors, framed it starkly: any person capable of angering you becomes your master, not because they control your circumstances, but because they've hijacked your attention. The irony: the person who hurt you likely never intended you to keep paying for the injury long after the fact. Yet each time you replay the scene in your mind, you're volunteering to relive it. Stoic forgiveness is the moment you step off that treadmill, not because the past has changed, but because you've decided your present is worth more than its weight in old wounds. So here's your challenge: pick one grudge, even a small one, and hold it in your palm like a pebble from a riverbed. Feel its edges, then ask yourself, does keeping this make the water clearer or just heavier to carry? The answer might just be the first step toward setting it down, not for their sake, but for yours. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing you've spent years living in a house that isn't yours, following someone else's rules, arranging furniture to their taste, even painting the walls colors you don't particularly like. That's what the Stoics called Eukiosis, the profound realization that you belong to yourself. The word itself comes from the ancient Greek for making something one's own, and it's the foundation of emotional sovereignty. Chrysippus, one of Stoicism's greatest minds, described it as the root of all ethical living, recognizing that your thoughts, values, and reactions are your domain alone. Not your parents' expectations, not your boss's demands, and certainly not the fleeting approval of strangers online. Now picture this: you post a photo on social media. Minutes pass, no likes, your stomach tightens. You check again, still nothing. That gnawing feeling, that's the exact opposite of Eukiosis. You've handed over the keys to your emotional state to an algorithm designed to keep you craving validation. The Stoics would ask, when did you agree to let a heart icon dictate your self-worth? Epictetus, born a slave and well acquainted with external control, put it bluntly: if you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and clueless. Not because he advocated for recklessness, but because he knew freedom begins when you stop outsourcing your sense of worth. Here's the radical shift Eukiosis offers. Approval seeking isn't just exhausting, it's a form of self-abandonment. Think of a politician who changes positions with every opinion poll, or a teenager altering their personality to fit each new friend group. Without a stable inner compass, you become a reflection of everyone but yourself. Contrast that with someone like Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire yet wrote privately. It never ceases to amaze me. We all love ourselves more than other people, but care more about their opinion than our own. That tension between our innate self-preference and our hunger for external validation is where Eukiosis does its work. Let's make this practical. Take a sheet of paper and draw 2 columns. On one side, list 3 things you genuinely enjoy or believe. Maybe it's your love of bird watching, your skepticism about hustle culture, or your preference for quiet Friday nights. On the other side, note how often you hide or downplay these because they might not impress others. The gap between those columns is the territory Eukiosis asks you to reclaim. Not through grand declarations, but through small, defiant acts of authenticity. Order the dish you actually want instead of what sounds sophisticated. Wear the outfit that feels like you, not the one that screams for attention. This isn't about rejecting community or becoming selfish. The Stoics saw Eukiosis as the first step toward true connection. After all, how can you offer others your real self if you've forgotten what that looks like? Think of a tree. Its strength comes from roots that hold firm, not leaves that flutter with every breeze. When Seneca wrote, "He who is brave is free," he wasn't talking about battlefield courage. He meant the daily bravery of living by your own light, even when it's easier to borrow someone else's. Your challenge today: identify one tiny corner of your life where you've been renting space in someone else's mind. Maybe it's the joke you don't tell because it's not cool, or the hobby you've shelved for being childish. Reclaim it, not with fanfare but with quiet certainty. That's Eukiosis in action, not a rebellion against the world, but a homecoming to yourself. And here's the secret: the moment you stop asking permission to exist as you are, you'll find the approval you craved was yours all along. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, was once a wealthy merchant until a shipwreck erased his fortune overnight. Standing on the Athenian docks with nothing but the clothes on his back, he reportedly said, "Fortune has done me a favor. Now I can begin to truly philosophize." This moment crystallizes the Stoic concept of preferred indifference, things we may choose to pursue or appreciate. but whose absence doesn't diminish our ability to live well. The ancient Stoics divided the world into two categories: things that are good or bad because they affect our virtue, like wisdom or cowardice, and everything else, health, wealth, reputation, which they called indifference. But here's the twist: they weren't saying these things don't matter at all. They were reminding us that our peace shouldn't hinge on them. Take a modern parallel. Imagine two colleagues facing the same layoff. One spirals into panic, convinced their worth has vanished with their job title. The other acknowledges the hardship but reflects, "This changes my circumstances, not my character." Both prefer having income that's natural, but only one has tied their selfhood to it. This is the critical difference between apathy and healthy detachment. Apathy says nothing matters. Stoic indifference says, "This matters, but it doesn't define me." The first is a surrender. The second is a strategic choice about where to invest your emotional capital. Consider how we approach physical health. No Stoic would argue against preferring vitality over illness. But when a diagnosis shatters that preference, the Stoic adjusts their sails rather than raging against the wind. Epictetus, who lived with a crippled leg, put it plainly: lameness is an impediment to the leg, but not to the will. Modern research echoes this. Patients who practice radical acceptance, acknowledging reality without helplessness, often experience less psychological distress. They're not indifferent to their health, they've simply refused to let it monopolize their identity. Here's your challenge: grab a notebook and list 5 indifference in your life right now. Things you prefer to have but could live without. Maybe it's your car, a particular relationship, or even your smartphone. Now rank them. Which would be hardest to release? That ranking reveals where you've quietly handed over pieces of your peace. The goal isn't to stop caring, it's to notice when caring turns into clinging. Like holding sand, the tighter your grip, the more slips through your fingers. The brilliance of preferred indifference lies in their flexibility. They allow us to engage fully with life while keeping our core untouchable. Marcus Aurelius, despite his imperial power, wrote, "Take away your opinion about what gives you pain, and you stand invincible." Not because the pain isn't real, but because its power over you is negotiable. So next time you face a loss, whether it's a missed promotion or a broken phone, ask yourself, is this a storm I'm weathering, or have I mistaken the boat for the shore? The answer might just redefine what you consider yours to lose. Epictetus gave actors everywhere an unexpected gift when he said, "Remember, you are an actor in a play. The playwright chooses whether your role is long or short, heroic or humble." At first glance, this might sound like surrender, but look closer. There's profound emotional physics at work here. When you know your role, really know it, the weight of existential uncertainty lifts. Imagine a stagehand suddenly thrust into the lead role with no script. The panic they'd feel isn't just about performance. It's about the terror of not knowing what's expected. Now contrast that with an actor who's studied their lines, understands their character's motivations, and trusts the director's vision. They might still feel nerves, but they are grounded in purpose. That's Stoic role ethics in action, not as rigid boxes, but as clarifying anchors. Take parenting as a case study. A sleep-deprived new mother paces at 3 a.m., her mind racing. Am I doing this right? Should I be more patient? What if I mess up her entire life? The anxiety isn't just about the crying baby. It's about the existential freefall of not knowing how to define herself in this new role. Now imagine her pausing to whisper Epictetus' words, "I am a parent, not a perfect one, not an all-knowing one, just a parent." Suddenly, her job isn't to magically fix every whimper, but to show up as best she can within the bounds of that role. The crying hasn't stopped, but the static of self-doubt quiets. This is why role clarity cuts through emotional chaos. when you're clear about who you're being, not what you're achieving, but how you're showing up. Decisions simplify. A leader facing layoffs doesn't agonize over being universally liked. Their role demands tough choices tempered with compassion. A friend listening to a divorce story doesn't scramble to fix the unfixable. Their role is to bear witness, not to mediate. Even in conflict, role ethics provide guardrails. Ever noticed how some people can argue passionately about politics yet still share a meal afterward? That's often because they've anchored in their role as respectful debaters, not conquerors needing to crush opposition. Here's how to put this into practice tonight. Grab a journal and draw 3 columns. In the first, list your core roles, not job titles, but identities: parent, partner, mentor, community member. In the second, note what each role truly requires at its essence. Not society's expectations, but your own distilled values. For partner, maybe it's presence over grand gestures. For professional, perhaps integrity over accolades. The third column, one small action to align with each role tomorrow. Not a lofty goal, but a tangible step: texting a sibling just to listen, or tackling a work task with full focus for 30 minutes. The magic happens when you realize roles aren't cages, they're compasses. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who preferred philosophy over pomp, wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." B1, that's role ethics at its finest. Not endless self-questioning, but the quiet confidence of knowing who you're choosing to be in each moment. When the storm of shoulds and what-ifs starts raging, your role becomes the eye of the hurricane, the still point where you remember, the play isn't about controlling every scene. It's about playing your part with dignity, whatever the script hands you. The Stoics loved a good paradox, those seemingly contradictory truths that reveal deeper wisdom when you sit with them long enough. Take their famous phrase, "The obstacle is the way." At first glance, it sounds like nonsense. How can the very thing blocking your path also be the path? But think of a river encountering a boulder. The water doesn't stop or rage against the rock. It flows around it, over it, sometimes even carving through it given enough time. That boulder, the apparent obstacle, becomes the force that shapes the river's strength and direction. What if your creative blocks, your setbacks, even your frustrations worked the same way? Consider writer's block, that soul-crushing blank page. Most of us treat it like an enemy to defeat or a sign we're not cut out for the work. But what if you saw it as the raw material for your next breakthrough? The Stoics would argue that resistance isn't proof you're on the wrong track. It's often the friction necessary to refine your craft. Think of a sculptor's chisel meeting marble. Without the stone's resistance, there'd be no art, just empty air. Your creative block isn't a wall. It's the grit that polishes your ideas into something sharper. This principle shows up in physics too. Newton's third law states that every action has an equal and opposite reaction. Push against a wall and it pushes back with the same force. That resistance isn't a flaw in the system, it's what allows movement to exist at all. Your muscles grow stronger by working against gravity. A sailboat moves forward by harnessing the wind that seems to push it backward. The obstacle doesn't just allow progress, it defines it. Marcus Aurelius, leading armies and governing an empire, wrote in his private journal, "The impediment to action advances action." He wasn't spinning metaphors, he was observing a law of emotional physics. What stands in your way often becomes the very thing that propels you forward. Here's the experiment. Pick one obstacle you've been cursing lately, a difficult coworker, a financial squeeze, even a stubborn habit you can't seem to break. Now, instead of asking how to remove it, ask, what is this teaching me? How is it forcing me to grow? Maybe the coworker's stubbornness is training your patience. Maybe the tight budget is honing your creativity. The Stoics didn't worship hardship, but they refused to waste it. Like blacksmiths, they knew the hammer's blows weren't destroying the metal. They were shaping it into something useful. The paradox cracks open when you realize obstacles aren't detours on the path. They are the path. Not because life is cruel, but because the friction you resent might just be the traction you need. So next time you hit resistance, try whispering the old Stoic mantra, not as surrender, but as a reminder, this isn't what's stopping you, this is where you start. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who carried the weight of Rome on his shoulders, once wrote in his private journal, Alexander the Great and his mule driver both died and returned to the same earth. There's something darkly funny about that, this all-powerful ruler reminding himself that even conquerors end up as dirt. That's Stoic humor in action, not denying life's gravity, but refusing to let it crush you. The Stoics weren't stone-faced ascetics. They understood that laughter could be a form of emotional alchemy, turning the lead of stress into the gold of perspective. When Marcus mocked his own ego by comparing himself to a dead mule driver, he wasn't being morbid. He was loosening the grip of self-importance before it could strangle his judgment. Now contrast this with toxic positivity, that forced, brittle cheerfulness that insists every cloud has a silver lining before you've even felt the rain. A coworker tells you they're drowning in deadlines and you chirp, just stay positive. That's not resilience, it's emotional bypassing. Stoic levity is different. It doesn't paste a smile over pain, it acknowledges the absurdity of the struggle itself. Picture a nurse in the ER after a grueling shift, laughing darkly about the chaos instead of bottling it up. That laugh doesn't mean the stress wasn't real, it means she's found a way to exhale the pressure without exploding. Here's where modern workplaces could take notes. Imagine your boss suddenly announces another urgent project after you've already pulled 3 all-nighters. You could rage, or you could channel Epictetus, who said, if someone tried to take control of your body, you'd fight back. Why then do you hand over your mind so easily? There's humor in that, the absurd image of someone literally trying to steal your brain like a cartoon villain. Recognizing that absurdity doesn't solve the workload, but it does something more important. It puts you back in the director's chair of your own reactions. Try this tonight. Start an absurdity journal, not a gratitude log where you force yourself to find the bright side, but a collection of moments where life's ridiculousness outshouts its seriousness. The printer jams 5 minutes before your big presentation. Your dog chooses your most important Zoom call to howl at the mail carrier. Write them down like a scientist cataloging cosmic jokes. Over time, you'll notice something: the things that felt like crises in the moment often become the stories you laugh about later. The Stoics knew this secret. Time turns most tragedies into comedies if you let it. Why wait? The genius of Stoic humor lies in its timing. It doesn't laugh at the wound, but at the bandage that's too small, or the way you tripped over your own shoelaces while running from the problem. It's the difference between a soldier grimly marching into battle and one who whistles a tune, not because the danger isn't real, but because defiance can be its own armor. Seneca, no stranger to suffering, wrote letters filled with wordplay and wit even as he described life's hardships. That's the emotional pressure valve in action, not a denial of darkness, but a refusal to let it extinguish your spark. So next time life feels like a poorly written soap opera, ask yourself, what would Marcus find funny about this? Maybe it's the way your phone always dies at the worst possible moment, or how you spill coffee exactly when you're wearing white. These aren't just annoyances, they're punchlines waiting to be noticed. And in that noticing, you reclaim something precious, the ability to hold life's contradictions lightly, even when they weigh heavily. After all, as the Stoics might say, if you're going to be a character in the universe's comedy special, you might as well enjoy the joke. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who famously lived in a simple hut despite his noble birth, had surprising advice for students struggling with emotional turbulence. Excess in sleep is just as harmful as lack of it. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. Aren't we constantly told to prioritize more rest? But the Stoics saw sleep differently than modern wellness culture. For them, it wasn't about logging 8 hours like a productivity metric or chasing some idealized state of perfect relaxation. Sleep was emotional recalibration, a nightly reset button for the mind's equilibrium. Picture a blacksmith's forge. The fire must be banked at the right intervals too little, and the metal won't soften too much and the coals burn out. That's Stoic sleep philosophy in action. Consider how you feel after a night of poor sleep, the irritability that flares at minor inconveniences, the mental fog that turns simple decisions into crises. Neuroscience now confirms what Musonius observed. Sleep deprivation shrinks the prefrontal cortex's ability to regulate emotions while amplifying the amygdala's panic signals. But here's where Stoicism adds a crucial layer. It's not just about the biological effects, it's about the judgments we attach to them. When you lie awake at 3 a.m., is it the insomnia itself that torments you, or the story you're telling about it? I'll be useless tomorrow. Why can't I just shut my brain off? Those silent scripts turn tossing and turning into a full-blown emotional storm. Take Sarah, a project manager who survived on 4 hours of sleep during a high-stakes product launch. By week's end, she snapped at a colleague over a typo in a Slack message. The Stoic diagnosis: her exhaustion didn't cause the outburst. It revealed how thin her emotional reserves had become, like a riverbed showing cracks when the water runs low. Epictetus would argue that with proper Prosoch attention to her mental state, she might have recognized the fragility earlier and adjusted her expectations accordingly. Not by magically sleeping more amid deadlines, but by granting herself the grace to respond differently in depleted conditions. This is where Stoic sleep rituals shine. Instead of counting sheep or obsessing over sleep trackers, try this pre-sleep reflection. Spend 10 minutes with a notebook answering 3 questions. First, what emotions did I feed today? Maybe it was lingering resentment from a morning argument or anxiety over tomorrow's meeting. Second, what emotions nourished me? Perhaps the quiet satisfaction of helping a coworker or laughing at lunch. Third, the most Stoic question: which of these deserve to cross the threshold of my night? You're not judging the emotions, you're deciding which are guests worth hosting in your mind's sanctuary after dark. The brilliance of this practice lies in its physics-like precision. Emotions are energy, and energy can't be destroyed, only transformed or redirected. By consciously composting the day's mental debris before bed, you're not denying frustration or worry, you're converting them into material for growth. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his meditations, often writing at night. When you have trouble getting out of bed, remember your duty to be human. Not a guilt trip about productivity, but a reminder that rest isn't escape, it's realignment with purpose. So tonight, when the world goes quiet and your head hits the pillow, experiment with this shift. Don't chase sleep as if it's a prize to be won. Approach it as the Stoics did, a daily surrender to nature's rhythm, where even wakefulness has its role to play. The crickets outside your window don't rage against the dark. They sing through it until dawn comes naturally. Your mind, when untangled from the knots of resistance, knows how to do the same. Seneca once wrote to his friend Lucilius, "Friendship always benefits, love sometimes injures." At first, that sounds harsh. Shouldn't love be unconditional? But the Stoics weren't dismissing affection. They were drawing a critical distinction between relationships that reflect your highest self and those that distort it. Think of a pond's surface on a windless day. It mirrors the sky with perfect clarity. Stir up the water and the reflection shatters. Stoic friendship asks, which relationships in your life act as that still pond, reflecting back your virtues rather than your vulnerabilities? Modern loneliness statistics tell a paradoxical story. We're more digitally connected than ever, yet drowning in shallow interactions, exchanging likes instead of thoughts, favors instead of trust. The average person has hundreds of social media friends, but maybe one or two they'd call at 3 a.m. in a crisis. Seneca saw this coming 2 millennia ago. Ponder for a long time whether you shall admit a given person to your friendship, but when you have decided to admit them, welcome them with all your heart. That deliberate pause before granting someone access to your inner world isn't distrust, it's emotional sovereignty. Consider 2 co-workers grabbing lunch. One relationship thrives on gossip, venting about the boss, dissecting colleagues' mistakes. It feels cathartic in the moment but leaves a residue of bitterness. The other conversation explores ideas, a book that changed their perspective, a skill they're both trying to master. Both interactions are social, but only one is nourishing. The Stoics would call this the difference between amicitia, true friendship, and commodum, transactional connection. Like a candle that lights another without diminishing itself, real friendship amplifies your light rather than feeding on your heat. Here's where the loneliness epidemic meets Stoic wisdom. When we confuse proximity for intimacy or shared complaints for bonding, we accumulate connections that drain rather than sustain. Marcus Aurelius, surrounded by courtiers in Rome's palaces, wrote privately, "When you wake up in the morning, tell yourself, the people I deal with today will be meddling, ungrateful, arrogant." Not because he hated people, but because he refused to let their flaws become his. That's the mirror at work, recognizing that every relationship shows you something about yourself. The friend who always cancels plans, they're teaching you about your tolerance for unreliability. The one who listens without judgment, they reveal your capacity for vulnerability. Tonight, try this audit. List 3 people who leave you energized after time together, and 3 who leave you depleted. Don't judge the categories, just notice. Then ask, what do the energizing ones reflect back to me? Maybe it's your curiosity, your resilience, your untapped creativity. The draining ones, perhaps they mirror your people-pleasing tendencies or unresolved resentments. This isn't about cutting people out. It's about becoming conscious of what each relationship stirs in you. The genius of Stoic friendship is that it's never just about the other person. Epictetus, who cherished his students yet lived contentedly alone, advised, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish by strangers." That's the ultimate test. When you stop outsourcing your self-worth to acquaintances' opinions, you free yourself to invest deeply where it matters. Like a gardener pruning not to punish the plant but to help it flourish, sometimes the bravest act of friendship is removing what no longer serves growth. Not with anger, but with the quiet certainty that some mirrors are better left undimmed. Epictetus warned his students with striking clarity. If you consort with someone covered in dirt, you can't avoid getting a little grimy yourself. He wasn't just talking about people, he was pointing to a fundamental truth of emotional physics. Your surroundings seep into your psyche whether you notice it or not. Think of your environment as a silent conversation partner, constantly whispering cues to your nervous system, that pile of unpaid bills on the kitchen counter. It's not just paper, it's a visual trigger for anxiety every time you walk by. The flickering fluorescent light in your home office, more than an eyesore, it's draining your focus like a slow leak. Stoic environmental design isn't about sterile minimalism. It's about curating spaces that amplify your best self rather than undermine it. Take the classic clutter trap. A study published in the Journal of Neuroscience revealed what the Stoics knew instinctively. Visual chaos overloads your brain's processing capacity, leaving less mental bandwidth for deliberate thinking. Imagine trying to meditate while standing in a thrift store. The sensory noise makes inner stillness nearly impossible. Now transpose that to your living room with its overflowing bookshelves, tangled charging cables, and that "I'll sort it later" corner. Each unchecked item acts like a tiny anchor on your attention, pulling you back into reactive mode. The Stoic remedy, not ruthless purging, but intentional zoning. Start with 1 square meter, a desk, a bedside table, even a single drawer. Clear everything non-essential, then observe how your mind breathes easier in that clean radius. That's not just tidying, it's reclaiming cognitive sovereignty. The magic lies in designing what modern psychologists call choice architecture, structuring environments so the virtuous path becomes the path of least resistance. Want to read more? Place the book on your pillow each morning so it greets you at bedtime. Hoping to curb phone scrolling, charge it in the hallway instead of your nightstand. Ancient Stoics practiced this through deliberate hardship, sleeping on thin mats or eating simple meals, not to punish themselves, but to prove that comfort was a preference, not a necessity. You don't need a monastic cell to apply this wisdom. Try creating a Stoic zone, a dedicated space where everything conspires to support your intentions. A corner with a sturdy chair and good lighting for journaling. A kitchen shelf stocked with wholesome foods that make healthy choices effortless. Even your phone's home screen can become a Stoic environment when stripped of time-sucking apps. Here's where most attempts fail. They mistake control for deprivation. Stoicism doesn't demand you live in an empty white box. It invites you to become the curator of your sensory inputs. The writer whose desk faces a blank wall isn't rejecting beauty. They're eliminating distractions so creativity can flourish. The runner who lays out their gear the night before isn't obsessing, they're stacking the deck for morning discipline. Your environment should work for you like a skilled stage crew, setting the scene so seamlessly that you forget it's there, freeing you to perform at your peak. Tonight, try this experiment. Walk through your space as if you're an emotional detective. Which objects whisper encouragement? Which ones drain your reserves? That aggressive red, urgent, sticky note might need replacing with comma phrasing. The chair angled toward the TV could pivot toward your neglected guitar. Small shifts accumulate into seismic changes. Epictetus knew this when he advised. First say to yourself what you would be, then do what you must. Sometimes what you must do starts with something as simple as turning your couch toward the bookshelf instead of the screen. Surroundings aren't just where life happens, they're the invisible hands that shape how you live. Marcus Aurelius left us a litmus test for meaningful action. What's not good for the hive is not good for the bee. That simple metaphor cuts through the noise of modern legacy building, where so-called impact often boils down to carefully curated social media posts or vanity projects designed to burnish personal brands. True emotional transcendence, the Stoic legacy isn't about crafting an impressive epitaph, but about dissolving the ego's hunger for recognition into something far more enduring, service that outlasts memory of the server. Consider two approaches to leaving a mark. One person spends years writing a memoir, obsessing over every anecdote that will make them look insightful. Another volunteers at a literacy program, sitting patiently with struggling readers week after week. Both might be remembered, but the second has achieved something the Stoics would recognize as emotional alchemy. Their legacy lies not in bound pages gathering dust, but in the quiet confidence of a child who now turns to books for solace and strength. The difference: one legacy is about being seen, the other about seeing what's needed. The Stoic view of legacy flips our cultural script entirely. While society urges us to build our personal brand, the ancient philosophers measured impact by how thoroughly we erased ourselves from the equation. Like a well-built bridge that doesn't announce the engineer's name with every crossing, the most enduring contributions often carry no signature, a teacher's wisdom echoing through generations of students. A neighbor's kindness that becomes family law in households they'll never visit. These are the legacies that transcend emotion, not because they lack feeling, but because they've transformed personal desire into communal nourishment. Here's the paradox: the less you chase legacy, the more likely you are to create one. Think of the anonymous donors who fund scholarships, the volunteers who plant trees they'll never sit under, or the mentors who invest in others without keeping score. Their actions follow Seneca's advice: wherever there is a human being, there is an opportunity for kindness, not a transactional exchange of "I give so I'll be remembered," but the pure Stoic calculus of recognizing that helping the hive is how the bee fulfills its nature. Your turn now. This week, plan one legacy action so small it feels almost insignificant, but so rooted in service that it could ripple beyond your sight. Maybe it's teaching a teenager in your family how to change a tire, ensuring their independence long after you're not around to help, or compiling a digital folder of life lessons for colleagues to access when facing challenges you've already navigated. The key isn't scale, it's sincerity. Like Marcus scribbling private notes that would guide millions, sometimes the most transcendent legacies begin as quiet whispers against the noise of the world. When we stop asking, "How will this be remembered?" and start asking, "How will this help?" something unexpected happens. We touch eternity not through monuments but through moments. Not by etching our names in stone, but by planting seeds in soil we may never see bloom. That's the Stoic secret. True emotional transcendence lives in the space between what we give and what we let go. Emotional physics, the Stoic art of navigating life's currents with clarity, boils down to three levers: how you perceive, how you act, and what you accept. Think of them as the dials on an old radio. Perception adjusts the frequency, tuning out static to hear the signal clearly. Action determines the volume, amplifying what matters while muting distractions. Acceptance is the power switch, acknowledging you can't control the broadcast but always choose whether to listen. Together, they transform chaos into something you can dance to rather than drown in. Recall the tools we've explored: the Stoic pause, that half-second window where you reclaim agency from reflex; Premeditatio Malorum, the rehearsal of challenges that turns fear into preparation; the Dichotomy of Control, separating what's yours to shape from what's yours to meet with grace. These aren't abstract concepts, they're emotional algorithms, coded by ancients and verified by modern neuroscience. Seneca, who packed lifetimes of wisdom into his letters, insisted, "Life is long enough if you know how to use it, not by chasing more hours, but by deepening each one through deliberate practice." Here's your challenge: not tomorrow, not next week, but within the next 24 hours, pick one Stoic lever and pull it. When irritation flares at a red light, test the pause, breathe before reacting. Facing a daunting task, try Premeditatio, play the worst-case scenario, then your response to it, or spot an unchecked assumption: "This shouldn't be happening," and reframe it objectively. The goal isn't perfection, it's noticing the machinery behind your emotions. Like a scientist running a field experiment, collect data on what shifts when you engage just one of these practices. Share your findings in the comments: what worked, what surprised you, even what backfired. This isn't just philosophy, It's a collective lab where we refine the art of living. For more Stoic insights to weave into your days, consider subscribing. But more importantly, carry one question forward. If today were your classroom in emotional physics, what lesson would you leave with? The answer might just be the first line of your next chapter.